Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. My name is Garth Landers. I'm a product marketer at Theta Lake, and I'm joined by our CEO and founder, Devin Redmond, also from Theta Lake, obviously. And we're going to be discussing the topic of digital communications governance and archiving and helping you to navigate the landscape. There's been a lot of discussion from the analyst community and from vendors. And there's probably a great deal of questions in the marketplace from organizations that are looking to protect and safeguard and be compliant with today's modern digital communications. Devin, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Garth, and thanks everybody for joining us here. We're looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your day, everyone. So we're going to have a discussion here about DCGA, and some of the topics we'll talk about today are, what is it? What's really driving the demand for digital communications governance and archiving with compliance, right? And then really the challenge. I have to warn you, things might get a little grim in a few minutes because we're going to talk about where this market evolved from. And you'll hear acronyms like Enterprise Information Archiving, EIA, you'll hear about DCGA, but we are going to spend some time giving you some guidance, a little bit of warning about, what legacy approaches look like and why they might not be a good fit for today's unified communications and collaboration. And then we'll talk briefly about Theta Lake and the difference that we bring to DCGA and, in fact, how we were built and constructed for modern collaboration and communications. So we'll begin with sort of a perfunctory definition, right? I think, Devin, last year, Gartner came out with this term of digital communications governance. They didn't have the A at the time. And just want to make clear, this is Gartner's definition, not Theta Lake's. So this is their statement. And really, what they put out was that this was an evolving market that was designed to really enforce, corporate governance and regulatory compliance in areas like financial services across all of the digital communication tools that are available to employees, which, as we'll see, are really, really important. I think one of the things that, separates DCGA from the past is that the past, we really focused a lot on kind of the compliance tool itself and kind of that environment, and less about things where it originated, like email and files. Those were almost secondary, but really, as we'll see today with unified communications and a lot of the complexity, that's really what's driving the market, right? In addition to some of the compliance and fines and regulatory impacts that have happened. But really, Gartner came out with this last year. They debuted the term in terms of a market guide and recently had a Magic Quadrant. We'll provide a link at the end of the document that'll give you the ability to come to our website and download a copy and see where all of the vendors and sort of the snapshot in time in 2025, what the market looks like. I'm going to turn it over to you, Devin. I know that, we both have had career stops and, in enterprise information archiving. So share with us a little bit, like, your experience being a provider and vendor and what that was like, when we looked at the onset of the market.
Yeah, it's a very interesting transition. I think a lot of the origins of the market, and again, I think when you use the word legacy, some people take that as a derogatory statement, but it's really just understanding the tradition and the heritage and knowing where this space came from and understanding that sometimes what worked in the past in a certain state and environment is not suitable for the present. And just like you wouldn't try and add all of the features of a car that you buy in 2017 to a car that you bought in 2005, because it'd probably make both cars or both concepts not work well. It's the same concept here. When you think about those origins, they were largely kind of siloed areas of compliance coverage, right? If you're thinking about the origins of EIA or enterprise information archiving, it was largely textual based data, oftentimes referred to as electronic communications, so email, files. Over time, the shift from instant messaging to what you would call workplace collaboration chat or persistent chat. from that perspective. And then in complete parallel and silo from that, things like voice recording as well as a whole different set of concerns. But really, and I don't want to use the word simple, but a really more straightforward path of, hey, you have files, you put them in an archive, or you have an email and you also journal to that archive, or you have a recorded line and you plug in the side and record that. And so a very one-to-one relationship in terms of getting communications and sending them, very different method of operating in terms of what you build to navigate from a search perspective, how you think about reconciliation of records and record keeping, very different state of the state. And the reality is over time, the needs in terms of how you analyze that data, the needs in terms of the different types of data that invade that, whether it's rich media that actually lives inside of an email, or whether things inside of chat, or whether you're starting to intersperse GIFs or rich media into those communications, or things from social, or you, heaven forbid, start using more and more video communications or audio files embedded inside of ecoms and vice versa, it becomes a very big challenge to navigate that in a system that just fundamentally wasn't built for that, and fundamentally wasn't built to deal with a lot of things that you had to deal with in cloud-based communication systems. And so really kind of understanding that and knowing that those silos and knowing that that approach and trying to build off of that approach or build off of that infrastructure set is going to be a very difficult challenge to be able to bridge those gaps and really solve all the things that you would want to solve from a digital communications governance and archiving perspective.
Yeah, really, really good points. And I think it's, this is where in some of the challenges lie in terms of, you know, perceptions, marketing, reality for prospective, DCGA decision makers and buyers, that on the surface level, it looks a lot similar, right? We see, overlap in terms of, hey, there's this need to, sort of contain, manage, capture content, and then associated applications. But, what you're describing is really, really different, and those communications become a lot more challenging. I think one other point we'll make here too is that at the same time EIA was happening with sort of email and file-based archiving, there was also kind of, a similar approach being taken with voice communications, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about voice today because it's really central to everything. It's at the crux of all of these different digital channels that we use today. It's so pervasive, and it's followed a trajectory also where it too, as we'll see, is making that move to the cloud, move to SaaS, and trying to really accomplish things that used to take place on premise with capturing, uh, direct capture of voice to now, all of these different voice over IP channels that we have, and so that intersection is also happening in the marketplace. So, one of the drivers for DCGA, you can see here, we had a survey come out. We have an annual survey now titled the Digital Communications Governance and Archiving Survey that surveys, over 500 individuals spanning both UC decision makers and IT as well as compliance. And we asked them this year, how many communication and collaboration tools are you using? And you can see that, 80%, right? Typically a great deal of them are using four or more, right? And then there's this, other big category of 31% that are using anywhere from 7 to 9. So you're looking at 80% of the respondents using anywhere from 4 to 9 different communication platforms. And as you can imagine, from a compliance and governance standpoint, this is really challenging, to say the least, right? We can't really take a siloed approach and look to have, a lot of insight into what is a great deal of complex and, high volume data. Devin, what's your take on this? As we see kind of the challenge that organizations are facing, you talk to a number of organizations every day. in financial services, global multinational, organizations that are looking to understand and put some level of control around this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the market, by and large, and customers have been handling triage, right? Dealing with the outflow of the modern workplace. When we started Theta Lake in 2017, and we had a vision for what became the digital communications governance and archiving market as defined by Gartner, but we really viewed that modern workplace as something that was inevitable, right? Where people were moving to tools that allowed them to exchange data, create data, communicate with each other across any modality, and all of those things intertwine, frankly, and increasing use of multiple tools. What happened during the pandemic, which might feel like a distant memory for some, was the catalyst in acceleration of adoption of those tools and really redefining the workplace to cement those as primary front and center tools, along with all the existing ones. Nobody's saying, and I think anybody that cries wolf that people are saying email is going away or other things are going away. It's not true, nor would we ever say that. What we are saying is that all of these tools cohabitate together, and increasingly, whether it's collaboration chat, whether it's workstream and project management tools, whether it's whiteboards, whether it's all of those things meshed together, are front and center and primary in a customer environment. And the challenge with that is the infrastructure for compliance was not built to support those individual tools at the pace that they're being, created, introduced to the market, evolve quickly with new features and capabilities, nor are they designed to deal with that meshing across those different modalities. And so what happened, if you kind of look at a logical progression, the pandemic happened, people adopted these new workplace tools en masse because they helped solve the challenge of that largely distributed workforce, people working remote. People came back to the workplace, but those tools are far superior from an efficiency. They're more modern. They drive the right behavior in the workplace. And so they came to stay. And the reality behind that corresponding compliance infrastructure was let's keep it together and try and solve as best we can for this. But now that the workplace is really normalized and you see the tool adoption has not slowed down, it's actually increased. The number of tools used has increased. The reality is the cracks in the seams of trying to hold it together with that legacy infrastructure are front and center for everybody. And that's reflected in what you're seeing in the fine environments and what will come next, which is the expectation that you can actually supervise that content as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really a mind-blowing. I think if you're not in a regulated industry, that the carry-on effect of all of this, right, is that what you described, organizations in regulated industries, they just don't adopt certain features and functions, right? Because the vendors they have may be incapable of supporting it, whether it's, screen sharing or in-meeting chat, Q&A, polling, any number of things, and they just restrict it, turn it off. And there's a tremendous loss of ROI. And as you mentioned fines, right? And that's, I think, most of the audience probably knows this, right? That we've seen over the last 3 years a tremendous amount of fines levied from, our friends at the SEC and other regulators to the tune of over $4 billion US, right? And so a lot of that is, improper communications because what you described is those users, will go elsewhere to be productive if their firms aren't offering them. And then, of course, in terms of record keeping, firms are not able to capture these communications, right? So there's just it's a carry-on effect that takes place because of the inability to really, put a digital communications governance and archiving strategy in
Yep.
place, and the inability of the, in-house providers that organizations have invested into to support that strategy, right? So
Yeah,
we've
it's
seen that, and it's, I think, what we've seen, right, is that the fines are starting to deaccelerate in terms of big, these huge multi-million dollar, $100 million type amounts, right? But they're still coming in, right? They're still pretty frequent. And things like personal accountability are now a thing, right? I mean, that's, a reality for decision makers in the organization that they'll be personally impacted and called out in some cases.
Yeah, there's a couple parts of this that create multiple vicious cycles. The first one is that without the capability or the comfort to feel like there was good record keeping coverage, a lot of organizations disabled the features in their enterprise tools, right? Whether you're thinking about in-meeting chat or you're thinking about how you treat whiteboards, et cetera, and the features that you disable, like you mentioned. And that has an effect downstream and creates that vicious cycle, which is if you make your communication infrastructure full of friction, not usable, not efficient, not like these tools behave in the real world, what we'll call the non-regulated world, users will find a way, right? I used to talk a lot about water always finds a way. And in this scenario, that's what would happen is they would go to the place where they could have the fastest, easiest communication, 8 times out of 10, not because they were trying to do something bad, but really because they were just trying to do what they're supposed to do, which is generate returns for their organization. Sure, you always have the outliers of the bad behavior, intentional that you have to deal with, but for the most part, a lot of the challenges are about the friction and not feeling comfortable turning on the tools that would keep the eyeballs and frankly have the physics of time where if you're spending 2 more hours a day on the collaboration tools provided by your organization because they're great and they're feature rich, that's 2 hours less that you're spending somewhere else. And that's just pure physics on that front. So you get through that cycle and the broad recognition by regulators that this is the case. And so a very good place for them to put scrutiny. Those may feel like they're declining, but not only will they, the long tail of those continue, the next wave comes with, okay, we've agreed on our strategy for you to mitigate, remediate, prove that you're doing it. We've been working with the ombudsman. We're going to come back around to see how effective your programs are and ask the next set of questions, which is, are you actively reviewing that and surveilling those communications effectively to make sure bad things aren't happening now that you're telling us that you're coming with a strategy to actually better do record keeping and keep people on channel? Are you actually surveilling that? And so that creates the next vicious cycle. And folks shouldn't ignore that that is the next thing that's coming. And there are things you can do to anticipate that and ready yourself.
Well, sure, thank you. Let's talk about one of those technologies that, we'll talk about the UCC platforms themselves and really how this is all interconnected and meshed, right? In terms of, what the modern workplace looks like. Devin, what does a typical digital conversation look like today for, an average user, right? It's not like email, right? Email to email. You said email might be part of the chain, but a call like this, we're
Yeah.
interacting on a number of fronts, and you can imagine, right, that multi-channel support is something that is essential, right? We're not talking about a one-to-one relationship anymore. We're talking, many to one, and that's just a really incredible hurdle for organizations to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the what I often refer to as the mesh is something that is very much underappreciated, and in particular from a compliance perspective. Because if you think about a daily conversation today, regardless of generation and the preference in tools and communication modes and even vocabulary across those different generations, a typical day for anybody in the workplace is going to have probably some form of a chat platform, whether it's Teams or Slack or Zoom or Cisco or Ring Central. And in that chat, you're probably going to have lots of different types of communications. There are going to be things with text. You're going to have emojis. You're probably going to say somewhere in there, hey, hit me up because I'm heading out and I'm going to be only on my mobile. And suddenly you're going to see an SMS that intrudes on that conversation, right? It's all part of the same conversation. And from that SMS, it says, hey, maybe we should do a quick call. And we do a quick call. And then from that call, we decide that we need a meeting. And so person comes back into the office and turns on a video meeting, and in that meeting they go, oh yeah, I've got that file here, and they share a link to a SharePoint site or a box file. All of that is one conversation, and all of that may have multiple mediums: voice, chat, may include an email, may include links, may include images that have text in them, certainly will have plenty of emojis throughout. And if you think about how a conversation works and how people communicate and collaborate, and then you think about how typical compliance infrastructure works, those two things are not typically aligned anymore.
Yeah. And I think, what this all adds up to too is if you're an organization and, you're looking at the output of all of this, if you're in IT and your customers internally are legal and compliance, and you're faced with, responding to a discovery request or responding to a compliance request, and then downstream, compliance teams and compliance personnel have to detect and identify that risk. That's all well and good, but if you don't have this data, which, is a real challenge, as you just outlined, Devin, it can be embedded in the communications. It could be multiple streams. It could be multiple apps. A conversation can take place over all of these different channels. It becomes a real challenge for organizations to respond and have a complete and accurate response, right, to all of this without any misses. And at the same time, based on, the challenges organizations have not capturing this data, there's a real lack of productivity and multiple, sort of response streams, right? So that too really challenges organizations, just not having this data, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I think that the part that's often overlooked as people will say, well, no, we get all that data, our compliance infrastructure gets it. If it's not in a standardized, natural format, right? You could say native, but native has additional baggage to it. But if it's not in the modality that it was meant to be, and it's not portrayed as that, and it's not natural, you're missing context. You're often missing elements of it. It's almost impossible to navigate it. So turning it into an email or an EML file so you can search text, or using a transcript as the proxy for voice or things that are happening inside of a meeting are not viable on their own, and they will not meet a true supervisory standard. And if you think that checking the box is something that can suffice here, how has that been going from a fine perspective for most organizations? Because the model of checking the box is not viable anymore, and the fines are so significant, even the trailing ones and the long tail ones, that it's much more viable to have a modernization strategy.
Well said. Thank you. So let's talk about one of your favorite applications, right? And I think, we've hinted this already. There's such a, in the regulated sectors like financial services, we hear things like ecoms and ACOMs, right? Referring to voice, and VCOMs for visual communications. And as an industry, right, it's really easy, I think, given what we've talked about thus far, like enterprise information archiving, the old term, right, heavily focused on ecoms, right? In this world today of audio comms, it's just pervasive, right? As we can see here, just really embedded throughout all of these different applications for regulated and non-regulated users alike, right? It just takes many different forms. Um, you know, as you talked about, really, if we don't provide this functionality as organizations, right, and from an IT standpoint, we don't provision this, if we disable, if we don't enable these features, voice being one of them, you can imagine the rush to unsanctioned shadow IT apps, right, that we've seen a lot. This is kind of a direct correlation to those fines that were impacted, that were illustrated earlier, right? Where people are really rushing out and embracing applications like WhatsApp that might not be endorsed or sanctioned, and certainly not managed from a governance standpoint. What's your experience on voice these days, Devin? It's like it's so essential, but it's easy to kind of, I think, for the industry to overlook sometimes.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where I'm enjoying the vast majority of DCGA vendors that came from the EIA space and came from the archiving space now really talking about voice and featuring that. That is something that we viewed as fundamental. We viewed that meshing of applications and modalities, and frankly, the shift to more modern cloud-based voice infrastructure as something that should be part of DCGA fundamentally. And I will give a couple of examples.
Are,
First
are you saying
example,
the transcripts are not enough, Devin? Is that?
I am saying that transcripts are not enough, and trying to say that you can store a WAV file and have a transcript, or an MP3 file and have a transcript and use the transcript alone as your ability to say that you support voice is not enough. And actually, the first example I was going to give is exactly a case in point in that. So, if I asked generally, what is Microsoft Teams? Is it a chat platform? Is it a meeting platform? Is it a calling platform? Is it a collaboration tool where you share files? The answer is yes on all fronts. And if you're saying that you can cover the voice and the rich media inside of Teams, yet you don't have a certified Microsoft Teams compliance recorder, then you can't claim credit for voice. You just simply can't do that. Hopefully, there are a lot more folks in the program than there have been, but to date, there are 13 vendors with certified Teams compliance recording capabilities. That means that not only can you get a transcript or can somebody put a wave in you, you're actually capturing those communications. You're actually providing transcripts with them. You're actually providing full playback. You can look at a wave format. You can look at word clustering. You can click in a transcript and go to that point in the audio and listen to it. And if you can't do those things, then you can't really say that you have real support for voice in a viable way. And that rigor of making sure that you have a unified system and making sure you have the capabilities of what is a long history and heritage of voice recording platforms that they bring in their own particular silo, unified with what you can do for e-coms and even video and visual communications. You shouldn't take credit for this, and you're certainly not going to empower customers to be able to unify real coverage for, whether you're talking about end user or business voice or trader or contact center. Like that's a rich feature set that you have to support. That means you have to support the full audio capabilities, not just a transcript and storing of an MP3 or a WAV file.
For sure. Thank you. Let's move on here and go back to our friends at Gartner because I think, when we've talked about thus far, sort of the conglomeration of all of these different channels, the challenges that all organizations face in terms of, providing governance and compliance for them, we can see that, Gartner has a strategic planning assumption, again, from their recent report, that 80% of DCGA customers are going to consolidate the supervision of text and audio and video-based content to a common solution over the next 4 years. And supervision is a good example, or surveillance, both is a great example of everything we've talked about thus far, because you really can't have a compliance review stream for, each modality, right? We can't have a team that just looks at voice and a team that just looks at email and a team that just looks at chat and looks at visual communications, and then we had to try to piece this all together. There's just not enough, personnel resources. Most organizations are not, even in the face of these fines, are not adding additional resources, right? So, the volume of content is really accelerating. As you've mentioned, Devin, the complexity and the mesh nature of it all, creates another challenge. And now, where the rubber meets the road is we've got these governance applications that have to keep pace, and not just keep pace, right? They have to be better than they were before. Taking a lexicon-based approach where you've got basically a data dictionary that identifies, the terms that are a violation or indicate some potential risk, or, breaking bad compliance behavior. Uh, Real challenges, right? And you add those layers of visual content. You mentioned transcripts as kind of an artifact. They can certainly be useful, but how do you do risk detection in visual communication? So this is kind of a great, strategic planning assumption from our friends at Gartner, because supervision is a great, is a natural outcome and output of all of the trends we've talked about today. Um, we've been a little bit negative so far about like all of these challenges and, the past and where the space is coming from. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about, what should ideal digital communications and governance and archiving look like, right? How are you going to address these compliance gaps that organizations face with new channel adoption, Devin?
Yeah, look, I think that's an important part, right? There is a path to success here, and I think there's a path to success without going through kind of what has typified the archiving market, which is kind of an 18-month RFP and evaluation, an 18-month forklift upgrade and shift over to a new infrastructure for frankly incremental gain on that front versus saying, hey, the change that has happened so fast. How do I dissect that and then compartmentalize the things that I can have the best impact on? And so, one of the first, I think, recognitions that everybody should have is that it's a data problem fundamentally. And to solve that modern data problem across these new communication tools, thinking about how you get the data and really solving at that layer, unifying things like capture, which we talk a lot about specifically, is fundamental to that, right? And that is something that requires a lot of effort, but you want to be able to have something that provides you a standardized format, provides you natural views of that content, and gives you the ability to get all that content correctly and context correctly. And that really starts by adopting capture, which ultimately you can actually do independently, right? You can start to enable business value. You can start to enable modern applications in the workplace as long as you can do good record keeping, as long as you can attest to that or have provability and reconciliation in that record keeping. You can solve that problem as a compartmentalized thing, which then gives you the benefit of having the right data. Now that doesn't necessarily solve that, your downstream systems may have bad storage models where pricing and frankly ROI of the vendor or revenue of the vendor is tied up in the storage of that, and they may not have the tools to deal with those modern modalities. But you can get it and you can rest assured that you have that content. And that gives you the ability to enable the business and enable value for the end users and the things that drive revenue for your organization. Then you can start to think about how do I get a better TCO by unifying my storage? How do I move to better models where I might bring my own cloud storage? I might use the efficiencies of the cloud on that. Still with all of the retention management, whether you're focused on audit trail or worm, and having all of those things and having the ability to navigate that data. If a system fundamentally knows how to capture all the natural aspects of that content, it will have the ability to understand how to represent those and allow you to search that content more efficiently. And then once you have all of that data, you have the opportunity to use modern analytics. You have the ability to use enrichment. You have the ability to basically say, hey, I've got all the data. I've got all the metadata. I have an easy way to navigate it. I also can use modern techniques to extract insights and use the right models for the different modalities of content. But you can compartmentalize that problem and make incremental progress so that you're driving value in a much faster timeline while you're working on the harder problems of reducing cost and centralizing and then improving your outcomes because you've been able to cross those. So,
Great stuff. Yeah. And I just wanted to hone in on one of the points you made too. I think really important for our audience and something that Theta Lake was built on, right, is that data independence, right? I think it's important, like when you look at this market, you look at a provider like Theta Lake that recognizes you've invested a lot in your existing architecture, your content stack, your archive stack, all of those things. And, ripping and replacing and migrating data as a first step is often really problematic, right? And it's something that's created a real negative perception. As Devin pointed out, with Theta Lake, we can support your existing archive and make sure you get that compliance gap covered right away in terms of new channel adoption. Similarly, we're a big believer in data independence, right? So you can always bring your own storage, bring your own cloud, and you in effect really own the data as you should rather than it being sort of locked away. So a little bit of a different wrinkle there than the historical market that we're used to, I think. Um, Pivoting to a little bit about Theta Lake, Devin, we're going to have some news soon. And why don't we just preview this a little bit? I know this gets you excited
yeah.
talking about Theta Lake as a platform. Um, Give us a little sneak preview of what people can hear about this.
Yeah, I think this is an important and kind of really aligns with that last concept. You talked about data independence. We really think that your DCGA infrastructure should give you access, leverage, the ability to take advantage of efficiencies in your environment, and frankly, give you a lot of transparency and visibility into your DCGA tooling. And so, not only have we created what we think is a terrific application to solve your needs of capture and reconciliation, search, unifying your archive, and setting retention libraries around that, and the ability to use analytics for supervision and surveillance, we've also backed that with an open API approach that allows you to better operationalize data lake, whether you care about observability or extended reconciliation or incident management and alerting system, whether you care about the ability to migrate data into the system openly or have an open ecosystem where any app, whether it's custom internal to your organization as a customer, or whether you have a third-party solution provider, software provider that you want to be able to write to it, having open APIs for that. And then just like Garth said, having a very focused approach on data independence, being able to use the data inside of Theta Lake, whether it's using us as an archive and having access via endpoints and the ability to pull data out, use data for other analytics, whether they're risk or whether they're productivity analytics, having a fully open approach, or whether it's having things like BYOS, where you can store the data in your own environment, being able to leverage that data. And that includes, the modern wave of being able to use your own AI infrastructure models that you may have developed as a customer, or even import your existing lexicons, having that be fully open. But importantly, back to that first bullet point as well, having that operational view where you can actually have the transparency to look inside of the system, monitor whether you're thinking about uptimes or data flows or any of those things, really having that radical approach of this shouldn't be a closed system. This shouldn't be essentially a black box. You should have the ability to have explainability, visibility, leverage of your data, the efficiencies of using the rest of your modern infrastructure that you've created in your environment to speed up efficiencies and user management, all of those backing the system. So while other folks are going to probably be talking more and more about how they're solving the data problem upstream and they have more integrations, we're saying, hey, we've not only progressed and support n number of communication tools and modalities, we will give you full visibility into the system and the ability to leverage data lake as infrastructure embedded in your environment.
Great summary there. I would say too, Devin, my guess is, we work with a lot of aggressive type A organizations, right? And they have access to all of these different channels and, incredible volumes of communications. Some of the applications probably we haven't even thought of yet, right? They're probably, they're going to be in the hands of our customers, in the hands of some really capable, developers. Data Lake as a platform, as a development platform, has been available for some time, and already we're seeing, dozens of organizations do some interesting things with it, as you said.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting factoid. It's in use in every one of our global data centers around the world. So over 8 countries of folks using that API infrastructure for everything from, observability tools like a Dynatrace or a Splunk or a Grafana, to identity management infrastructure, all the way into data extraction, even third-party vendors, software vendors writing their new communication and collaboration tools to our API, in addition to our own certified built-in integration. So
Great. Thank you. So, just want to move ahead a little bit. We talked a lot about kind of some of the challenges that third-party solutions have. One of the ones that's an overlooked sort of part of the buying process, but as we know, has made a lot of news recently, given the fines and sanctions, is reconciliation, right? It's a real gap. Sounds simple on the surface to tell you where content is coming from and where it's going and where it's located, but not really easy to do. Can you tell us a little bit about how Theta Lake provides reconciliation, Devin? The three different
yeah,
ways we do that.
yeah, and this is it's a super hard problem for customers, and especially since the world that most are coming from, that I mentioned earlier, is kind of a one-to-one, right? Email gets sent, email gets journal, right? Or I'm recording a phone call, I plug in the recorder into the side of the phone, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively. but it's kind of that one-to-one. And then you think about modern cloud-based communication and collaboration tools and all the different aspects of communications they may include, right? Is the actual text in the chat that I sent you that said, hey, thumbs up, I'll be right there, a message? Is the thumbs up its own element in that message? If I include a link to a file, is that a message I need to reconcile? Like how do all those things string together? And so thinking about that, thinking about the variability also in those tools, right? It is cloud-based, API-driven infrastructure. Um, you can have everything from I'll call it a flap in an API to a change in functionality that can affect your ability to capture those records. All very, very difficult challenges. Something that we've focused on is providing what I'll call kind of three layers of the ability to reconcile in those upstream platforms. First, we have a lot of rigor in unifying capture. We have a lot of standardization in the formats. We have a lot of discipline in terms of understanding how to handle errors or changes or updates or recovery and dealing with high watermarks in the communications so that all of those are available. We surface those in a dashboard, which also gives you the benefit of insights and trending and the ability to see outliers super visually upfront. We give you the ability to run scheduled reports also so that you have auditability in a scheduled report. And then per the last topic, we also expose all of that in an API endpoint. So if you have your own tools or you want to instill your own level of trust in terms of doing reconciliation, go ahead and query the system because you can do that via the endpoints as well and create your own monitoring, or perhaps you already have applications that do that. You can do those things. But giving you the confidence that you have defensibility and provability in what you say you have, where it was delivered, and what you currently have.
Yeah, all super important for auditability, as you mentioned, and something that can make, organizations' response to to governance events a lot simpler, right? I mean, there's always going to be what we're illustrating here, which is the need to search for communications, right? But that reconciliation really gives you sort of the meta layer and visualization that says, hey, here's where it was captured. This is defensible. This is the process we have in place. And this is, where it is today, right? So um, one of the things we talked about today really is kind of the complex nature of these communications and how they take place over, a variety of channels. It's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many. And from a compliance standpoint, responding to that, trying to piece things together can be enormously challenging when you're facing a deadline with a potential fine or sanction or negative judgment. All at the other end of that, if you can't make sense and understand the merits of your case. What are we looking at here, Devin, with unified search and conversation replay from Theta Lake? Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, this is great, and this is one of the innovation things that I think we're really proud of because I think it embodies solving the challenge of the modern communication environment in the modern workplace. So I mentioned this earlier. If you think about how people work today, they have a conversation or a set of conversations over multiple tools and modalities. 100% you have to solve the challenge of capturing all those communications and driving people to do more on-channel versus off-channel tool usage. And solving that gives great business value. The next problem that gets created is just like Garth mentioned, how do you navigate all of that communication? This is a view of a conversation that's taking place over multiple tools, over multiple modalities, some mobile, some SMS, some voice, some chat-based, some file-based within those chats, and being able to look at that and see the timeline of that conversation between users, pick the modalities that you're going to focus on. If you expand this view, which we won't do here, but happy to do a demo, you could see all the modalities are there and you could click into a portion of the chat and scroll up and down the timeline of that chat in a very natural view, normalized view of what a chat would actually look like, including all of the right visual elements, whether it's emojis or GIFs or other things embedded in that. If you opened up a voice call that happened on mobile, you'd be able to replay that in addition to looking at the transcript. You would see which detections hit, which resulted in those scores, right? The red ones are ones that you probably want to prioritize and take a look at as higher priority. But you would see where those detections hit in those conversation and the rationale behind why they hit. So lots of explainability in that. But frankly the thing that makes it possible to navigate and have the efficiency that you need to deal with the modern workplace and deal with modern communications and what a conversation looks like.
Yeah, incredible stuff. And a screenshot doesn't do it justice. We've got a link for you. We invite you to come schedule a demo. Really, seeing is believing. This is something when you think about the array of information, a timeline view. As Devin mentioned, a chat could take place, a conversation could take place over a year, it could take place over 14 months. And to be able to look at all of these modalities in one timeline view and then double click on that and take action based on the content, right? It's just another level of productivity, especially for those, folks that are leaders in the infrastructure world that are responding to those governance events that have compliance and legal as their internal customer, right? I mean, it brings them a lot of delight. So we're going to be wrapping up here, but I think what we came away with, we talked about a lot of challenges, right? And hopefully we made it, clear in terms of DCGA, the path to it. It shouldn't be everything all at once, right? That this is an enormous challenge. You're typically facing it in terms of new communications channels, in terms of adoption of a new channel, in terms of adoption of a new platform, and wanting to address that compliance gap, right? So the path to modern DCGA is a multi-step journey, and incremental. And really, as Devin talked about, that first step on the journey is to address compliance gaps through, your capture operations, making sure that you have a provider like Theta Link that has that seamless integration with the leading communications platforms today, and keeps pace, right? The part of capture that's really hard too is that these platforms often are, releasing 30, 40, 50 pieces of functionality per quarter that you want your vendor to keep pace with and make sure there aren't any gaps that you're not aware of, right? Because this is all SaaS, right? These updates happen. You might not be aware of it. We talked about sort of the data management situation and path moving forward, right? In terms of being data independent, you should own the data. You shouldn't be locked into sort of a black box. You shouldn't be reliant on the vendor to provide data for you. You shouldn't be reliant on huge extraction fees to get access to that data. And then we talked about, and we just illustrated some of the applications like unified search and conversation replay. Surveillance and supervision are another, governance application. They shouldn't be the starting point, right? They're the end point. And what we talked about a lot today is that most of us start with a data problem, right? We need to be able to have that data, be able to contextualize it, have it in its native format, to be able to understand it, when it's in conjunction with all of these different channels and meshed communications, so that once we've done that, the governance applications searching for it, responding to events, detecting risk. That should be, relatively simple, right? We've got some other elements here and just, walk you through some of these screenshots. Devin talked about unified capture a little bit. What are we looking at here, Devin, with the visibility around, the Sankey diagram?
Yeah, so this is a good example. We showed one earlier, which is part of the same dashboard that we use for unified capture. This is really thinking about your data flows, right? Which sources are you getting data, validating where they're ending up, right? Is it a retention library in Theta Lake? Is it going to a third-party storage infrastructure? Is it going to a third-party archive? Maybe you're still sending email downstream to another system. The ability to do all of those things in parallel, right? Sending content to multiple sources and being able to understand that data flow while you're also looking at the health of integrations and things like uptime and things like the reconciliation trail on that. So really having that unified view and that consistency there.
Great stuff. Yeah, again, once we're capturing all of these different channels, right? It's high volume, always on, different applications. You want to have that big picture view and visualization. We had an interesting question from the audience, Devin, and it's around kind of the evolution. If you're an organization looking to evolve from EIA to, they put it, these newer DCGA applications, what are some of the organizational and process considerations you should make. I'll let you take that one, but I'm going to guess you see leaders, right? And getting closer to that part of the organization is really important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, change is probably one of the hardest things in this market segment, and change has happened overnight in terms of the workplace technology. I think there's a couple aspects. Certainly, first and foremost, like Garth mentioned, understanding the workplace tools and understanding how that changes the behaviors of end users, how that changes what they can or expect to do in their communications is a key part of that. The other part of change is, we had that little visual before, but kind of like I said, compartmentalize, create an incremental approach. Because if you try and change everything at once, which frankly has been the state of the market for a long time, right? You go through that 36-month cycle and you get the kind of that incremental shift, but it's of a very static environment. If you think about what changes in a 36-month time period and what's changed in your organization over the last 36 months, an approach where you're trying to do a lift and shift whole change is going to break too many things downstream, and frankly, the goalposts will have shifted by the time you get to the end of that 36 months so substantially that any of those gains are suspect at best. And so, the best approach you can have is understand the communication environment and the data that you're going to need to manage upstream. Start to accommodate that so you don't disable the workforce, because ultimately that disables return on investment for the business and top line growth, but also impacts your record keeping. So impacts the bottom line by triggering more fine environments or events that you have to deal with. And then downstream from there, as you start to collect that data, start to think about where it impacts and what you can modernize, both in terms of efficiencies on things like investigations and search and e-discovery, but also reducing TCO by unifying how you store that data and accommodate that data. And then from there, it's about helping folks understand the change in process and how to navigate it and modernize a little bit. Get back to that car analog, probably the Ford pickup truck that I had in 2001 didn't have nearly the sensors and the dashboards that the station wagon I have now has on that front. But I had to learn those things. I think it's okay to expect that you have to shift a little bit and understand what a rear parking sensor does, and what all the different new buttons do. But you can do that incrementally and still continue driving the car the way you would. So,
Great stuff and great question from the audience.
yeah.
Another aspect of Theta Lake's unified capture really is, we talked about the always on, connecting to multiple platforms, capturing high volumes, lots of streams of data. Tell us a little bit about kind of the health status that we released last year, right, around unified capture. What does that do for administrators?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And I kind of touched on it a little bit when we were talking about the data flows. If you think about that next part, being able to validate that during the time period that you're asserting record keeping, that you had the data flows, that you're looking at reconciliation, you can also validate that the platform was healthy, right? It was up, it was running, it was connected to your system, you were capturing data. Everything is viable on that front, and having a lens on that will keep you updated. Hey, something's not working with this particular platform, whether you pause it or whether credentials potentially timed out or whether something else is going on with that integration. Having visibility into that is part of the formula. Again, that's not a static environment where you're copying off an email or you're journaling a chat digest that's been converted into email that's being sent downstream. You're actually monitoring connectivity with those platforms in terms of how you're capturing data, and are they up and running and available and configured properly when you're doing that.
Uh, we're just about near the end, and we'd be remiss. I think the audience is probably, hopefully, they're impressed at this juncture. We've only used the word artificial intelligence, I think, only once. I was keeping score, right? We're not AI washing with this one. So, we talked about governance applications and the things that we do with Theta Lake. I think when you talk about supervision and surveillance, they're a little bit different at Theta Lake, right? They weren't built sort of on this, serial sort of email centric, almost assembly line workflow, right? That we think of with traditional supervision. Tell us a little bit about machine learning and NLP in Theta Lake with regards to, this traditional application?
Yes. First, I'll say that first part. I think AI washing abounds out there, and is something that, if you look at our pedigreed, proven data science team, carries a little bit of an ick factor. But um, to their credit and to the credit of the technology we've developed here, the ability to use machine learning to benefit from the modernization that's come in the recent wave of Gen AI and the things that are there, uh, really starts with understanding that Data Lake was built to kind of have those three layers of making sure you're getting the right data at high quality in a unified, standardized, or natural way, understanding that we have a great ability to store that efficiently and make it very, very searchable in that natural format and kind of have that rich context that would go with it. And then in addition to that, having the ability to extract insights. Part of that is having our own machine learning based detections. And again, explainability is always the big question there. We have multiple aspects of explainability. First, full explainability overviews. Second, the ability to have a classifier audit report where you can validate which things are hitting on what inside of the communication content. And third, full control over the humans that interact with that and the judgment to provide insight on those detections, not just is it a false positive, and certainly that's something that you want to have control over, but the context of, hey, actual detection but not a valid risk, right? And having all of those things captured and be part of not just the audit logs, but any training loops that you want to provide. All of those are there. Leveraging that approach to also say, hey, there are a lot of things that are very common and standard and make it very easy for customers of any size to adopt things that are going to look for, as an example, off-channel communications, or are going to look for collusion in content, whether you're a 500 person brokerage firm and you have a small staff and you need lots of automation, being able to rely on something that's very simple to implement, has lots of explainability in it, and is very easy to navigate, or whether you're a very advanced organization with its own data science team where you want to augment detections or you want to combine some of the things and concepts in these built-ins and import your own models or use your own lexicons, being able to support all of those together and give you the confidence that you have the right explainability, that you have the ability to find the things that you want to find quickly and effectively inside of those communications, and the ability to build on that going forward across any modality of communication.
Great stuff. And a very timely question here from the audience once again, which is around, what kind of detections are we offering here? And I'll take that really quickly. Devin's talked about the science behind it here, but, I'd be remiss as a marketer if I didn't tell you that these are out of the box, right? So the kinds of detections Devin's been talking about, address all of the different regulatory bodies. If you're talking about SEC or FINRA or NASD rules, those detections are available, as well as, general sort of, policy information governance, racism, hate speech, those kind of conduct detections are available, as well as privacy detections. And, the number of permutations you can create is limitless. So out of the box, but highly flexible and gives you really fast time to value. So you're not, stuck in sort of a data science exercise. And all of these detections are updated and maintained by Theta Lake continuously. So, there's no bespoke sort of brittle, detections that are serviced by a vendor that you become dependent on. It's all there, it's all available. So, really important part. So we're wrapping up here at the top of the order, top of the hour, sorry. And I just want to invite you to visit us at thetalake.com, where you can receive and sign up for the Magic Quadrant we talked about today from Gartner, the 2025 Digital Communications Governance and Archiving Magic Quadrant. We also referenced our compliance and security report for 24-25 that gives all of those insights, so many good details about what over 500 individuals spanning IT and compliance leadership roles, what they're seeing with UCC, how they're responding from a governance standpoint. And then, of course, we'd always invite you to sign up, see Theta Lake in action. We had some, screenshots, static screenshots for you today, but getting a look at the application and seeing all the things we've talked about can be really illuminating. So I want to thank Devin very much for joining us today, and thank you, the audience, and thank you for your questions of participation. We look forward to hearing from you, and take care and have a great day. Thank you.
You.